Good morning to everyone. I'd like to extend a welcome to everyone who's attending today to our highly anticipated webinar on medicinal cannabis in the workplace. My name is Matthew Holton. I'm the General Manager Operations at Safework Health. Today, we embark on a journey to delve into the dynamic landscape of medicinal cannabis and its implications within the Australian workforce. I say a journey as this will be the first in a series of webinars on medicinal cannabis that will continue to cover the evolution of this topic based on changes to legislation and policies and build on the questions and concerns that are raised from this initial educational piece. Now, the topic of medicinal cannabis has gained significant traction over the past decade, and its potential therapeutic benefits have sparked intense discussion in various spheres, including healthcare, research, and policy making. As its medicinal applications become more evident, employers and employees alike are seeking clarity on its integration into workplaces, addressing the balance between health, safety, and productivity. Australia, renowned for its progressive stance on healthcare, has been at the forefront of this shift. The legal framework surrounding medicinal cannabis has evolved, offering new possibilities for individuals with certain medical conditions. However, with these opportunities, as most of you are probably becoming aware, come challenges, particularly when navigating its utilisation in professional settings. Today, I'd also like to introduce Safework Health's National Chief Scientist, Nathan Brown, to give a unique perspective on the subject. From Nathan's and our extensive experience in workplace drug testing, we aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of the science and current landscape. Throughout the next 30 to 40 minutes, we will explore various facets of this evolving topic. And our agenda includes what is medicinal cannabis, so unraveling the science and looking at how it's prescribed, prescription rates of medicinal cannabis, and looking at the changes in this rate in the recent years, looking at potential impacts. Nathan will take us through two case studies and look at two different scenarios. And then we'll finish up with some Q&A. So, look, this webinar serves as an essential platform for meaningful discussions and evidence-based insights. It's crucial to ensure that any steps taken to integrate medicinal cannabis into workplaces are founded on research, empathy, and a commitment to promoting a healthy, safe, and productive work environment. We encourage all participants to actively engage and ask questions via the question tabs on the presentation. The tabs is in the upper right-hand side of your screen there. You'll also notice a poll tab there. Now, if you see any questions that are already raised and is relevant to yourself, then please vote on those questions. This will assist us in getting the most popular first, as we won't have time to answer all the questions today. But saying that, we will record all questions and then we'll send out a Q&A in the following days. Also, as I mentioned there, throughout the presentation, Nathan will be asking some polling questions. So if you could be ready for them and give a quick response, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, there are no right or wrong answers for the poll questions, and we won't be recording who or how they're recorded. So thank you again for joining us today, and without further ado, let's commence this insightful exploration into the realm of medicinal cannabis in the workplace in Australia. Nathan, over to you, mate.
Thanks, Matt, and hi, everyone. As Matt said, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, just enter them into that questions tab, and we'll get to as many of them as we can after the presentation in the Q&A session. So in Australia, medicinal cannabis refers to a broad range of pharmaceutical cannabis preparations that are intended for therapeutic use. Medicinal cannabis products need to be prescribed by a doctor to treat the symptoms of a medical condition or the side effects of another medical treatment, for example, the side effects of chemotherapy. Medicinal cannabis preparations can include tablets, oils, tinctures, and other extracts, or even the use of the plant material in a vaporizer. So generally, medicinal cannabis refers to two types, or the two active ingredients that are present. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is also referred to as Delta-9 THC, or just THC, and cannabidiol, CBD. Structurally, they're very similar. However, they do act differently in the brain, And it's important to remember that the THC has the psychoactive effect, while CBD does not. So if you look at the structures in the lower right-hand side of that slide, you'll see the only difference really is in that red circle and whether or not the oxygen molecule there is bound into a ring in delta-9 THC or open in CBD. Both are produced to varying degrees in different strains of cannabis, and the ratios between the two can be optimized by growing conditions, or they can be removed with washing as part of the processing for use as a medication. Are they TGA approved? The short answer is yes, they are, but through a special access scheme, which means the medications haven't been assessed for safety, quality, or effectiveness like other medications that do have approval. This also means that it can be prescribed where no approved medications are available as treatment, and any GP can request to prescribe them. The most common indications for these prescriptions are pain, anxiety, and sleep disorders. So it's really important to understand that there's 5 different classes of cannabis products available under the scheme, and that they change and contain a relative concentrations of THC and CBD. Category 1 is effectively pure CBD, with greater than 98% present and minimal levels of THC and other cannabinoids present. Category 2 will have between 60 and 98% CBD, with 2 to 40% THC and other cannabinoids. And Category 3, you're looking at between 40 and 60% CBD, with the remainder of THC. As we get to Category 4, we see that THC starts to become the dominant component, with greater than 60 to up to 98% THC, with CBD making up the remainder. And Category 5, which is almost pure THC, very little levels of CBD, less than 2%. So there's no issues with someone using a Category 1 medicinal cannabis product at work, as it doesn't have that psychoactive effect. The real issue is the THC and the high that it produces. What category is prescribed will depend on the condition being treated and the ideal outcome that they're seeking for the patient. So it's a quick poll question, which I'll just turn on now, over in the right-hand side. Which state in Australia do you think prescribes the most medicinal cannabis per capita? And if you can select your votes, we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. So medicinal cannabis was first made available prescribing through the SAS in 2015. The latest available information through to mid-2021 shows that the approvals per month have increased from nothing to over 10,000 a month in that time, with cumulative approvals up to 150,000. So as you can see, 10,000 a month and growing shows just how impactful this can be as use becomes more widespread. You'll notice that prior to 2019, there was very little prescriptions occurring, and there's been quite a huge increase over those last 2 years there. And we expect that that trend will have continued over the last 2 years as well. So age trends show that the fastest growing cohort is the 18 to 30-year-olds. You can see that in the dark blue at the bottom of the slide there. They seem to be continually growing. You can see that the data on the left-hand side of the graph is a little bit more varied, and that's just an outcome of the fact that there's not a lot of data for that the first 2 or 3 years. There wasn't a lot of prescriptions being made, so it's really hard to pull a trend out of that little amount of data. As we get to post-2019, you can see that the trends start to crystallise as we've got more data to look at there. The split between male and female is fairly even. You can see, again, on the right-hand side of the graph, we've got lots more data. We're tending to sort of that 50-50, 40-60 split female to male. And as with previous data, there's not a lot of information we can pull from the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side, we've got a lot more information. So now, how's our poll looking? So it looks like at the moment we've got about 40% New South Wales and Canberra, 20% for Victoria, 25% for Queensland, and the remainder for the other states. Which is fairly good guess, but it's actually Queensland is the clear winner with about 125 approvals per month per 100,000 people. Most of the other states are around 1/5 of this number. Why is that? Well, the data only shows the prescriber location, so it doesn't show where the person receiving the prescription is. And consults for medicinal cannabis can occur online or over the phone, and you don't necessarily need to be in the same location as the doctor who's prescribing. And that's what we think is happening. There might be a fair portion of this being done online for people in other states out of Queensland. So the potential impacts of medicinal cannabis use will vary depending on the employee's role and the company's appetite for risk. Today we'll look at 3 key areas. We'll look at safety critical roles, we'll look at impairment versus residual levels, and we'll have a quick look at policy management as well. So medicinal cannabis does have the same issues as those associated with recreational cannabis use. It is currently illegal to drive a motor vehicle with any detectable level of THC in your system in most states. However, it is perfectly legal to drive with any CBD in your system. Rules do currently vary from state to state. As an example, currently in Tasmania, driving with any detectable level of THC in your system is an offence, unless the product was obtained and administered in accordance with the Poisons Act of 1971. So it is, if you have a prescription for medicinal cannabis, you may be allowed to drive a car in Tasmania. However, there is a caveat that states a person who drives a vehicle while under the influence of a drug, to the extent that person is incapable of having proper control of the vehicle, they are guilty of offence, even if the drug is prescribed. So that means if you were pulled over and you have a prescription for medicinal cannabis, you still need to demonstrate that you're not affected by it while you're driving that motor vehicle. It's not a get out of jail free card to just drive with medicinal cannabis. You still need to demonstrate that you are in full control of the vehicle. It's also worth noting that Victoria and New South Wales and Victoria have recently introduced legislation, or will introduce legislation in the next few months, to allow trials of people driving while using medicinal cannabis. So the issue though is that there's no method of quickly detecting a THC level in a driver's system. We have no equivalent to a breath alcohol for THC. Oral fluid tests we use currently are basically a rule in or rule out test. They only show if THC is present above or below the set cutoff for the device. For safety critical roles, where the safety of oneself, other employees or the public can be impacted, there may be higher requirements for alcohol and drugs. For certain professions, like the police, they have a zero tolerance approach to any illicit substances. Other positions, you might determine that the cutoffs mandated in AS 4308 or AS 4760 are sufficient. This extends to roles as well where safety decisions are made. It's not just for people who are doing the safety task. As an example, you could include financial controllers or people in management positions who are making decisions that can affect the safety of people on their work sites. It's not just limited to employees performing those safety critical roles. So in oral fluid, typically we have an 8 to 12 hour detection window for THC, but in some cases it can be as long as 2 days. The screening cutoff, as per the standard, is 15 nanograms per mil, and the confirmatory cutoff is 5 nanograms per mil. What's a nanogram? Basically, we're looking for 1 in 1 billion. So finding 15 nanograms in 1 mil of oral fluid is like trying to find 15 blue grains of sand amongst 1 billion yellow ones. It's a little bit of a simplification, but it does give you an idea of just how difficult this can be and what the low levels look like in a sample. Higher screening cutoffs in testing account for the less specific nature of a screening test versus the confirmatory method. So in a screening test, anything present in the sample that has a similar structure to delta-9 THC can interact to cause a non-negative screen. When we're confirming, we use liquid chromatography with mass spectrometry though, which is highly specific and can detect individual components in the sample with really high accuracy. And our methods are tailored for each analyte. That is to say, when we receive a sample for oral fluid THC analysis, that's all we're looking for, just the delta-9 THC itself. It's worth noting as well that if an oral fluid is negative, then an employee is fit for work. If you don't detect any THC, they shouldn't be affected by it. In urine though, the detection window is considerably longer, primarily because we're looking for a metabolite of THC. So we're actually looking for a carboxy THC, which can be stored in fat cells of the body and can be released into the bloodstream over a much longer period. Days for one-off or infrequent use, up to 2 to 3 months for frequent heavy users or people who are overweight or obese. Levels detected in urine do not correlate to impairment in any way, although it is worth noting that urine is reported in micrograms per litre. This is equivalent to nanograms per mil in oral fluid, but the results are not comparable between oral fluid and urine. Interpretation of results is also made more complex in urine due to the variable nature of the sample and its concentration, depending on the hydration level of the donor. We'll come back to this a little bit later. So cannabis is currently regulated under many different acts and standards because of its previous illicit substance status in Australia. So we have the Narcotic Drugs Act, we have the Therapeutic Goods Act, the Australian Poisons Standard, the Customs Act, and various state legislation involved in developing what is and isn't allowed. They don't always agree and they don't always balance each other out. So how should you write your policy? Well, it should be general with respect to the standards. You shouldn't reference specific numbers in each standard because they can vary over time, and policy is generally not updated as often as the standards can be. Now, you should treat medicinal cannabis like any other prescription medicine. You should treat it the same as any opiates, anybody who's taking any other painkillers, things like that. Your employees also, you should be note that employees are not necessarily required to declare their medications and do have a right to privacy, but encouraging employees to come forward and work with them can be beneficial for everybody. It's also worth noting that zero tolerance policies are very difficult to enforce as they need to be applied equally across all employees and are often difficult to defend. A better approach would be zero harm. So currently, unfair dismissal cases are rare, but as these prescription levels increase, they will become more common. And how a case is determined will be based on how the employer handled the dismissal, which in turn will be based on the company's drug and alcohol policy and how it's been used in the past. So I have another poll question here we'll turn on now. How confident are you that your drug and alcohol policy would be enforceable in court? We'll come back to that as people have started to vote. And we will work through our first case study for now. So for our first case study, we have a donor who was taking medicinal cannabis, who returned a urine confirmed positive carboxy-THC at 120 micrograms per litre. So a week later, on a subsequent test, the donor reported a THC result of 35 micrograms per litre. And then on day 18, a further 10 days later, the result was 85 micrograms per litre. The client called the lab and asked if the results were consistent with the stated medications, given there's quite a bit of variability in those numbers. It's worth noting again that the screening cutoff for urine THC is 50 micrograms per litre, with a confirmatory cutoff at 15 micrograms per litre. So first of all, we'll need a way to compare the results across days. We can check the level of creatinine present in the urine sample to determine how concentrated the urine is. You may be aware that we use creatinine to determine if a urine sample is too dilute for testing on site, or we test them all in the laboratory. So the body forms creatinine at a fairly standard rate, as it's a waste product from the supply of energy to muscle. We can take the carboxy-THC result on day 1 and divide it by the creatinine result we've received to have a ratio of a carboxy-THC to creatinine. So for this sample, the ratio is 11.5, but by itself, it doesn't really mean much. You typically need a minimum of 2, preferably 3 or more points to see if there's a trend to the data. So if we calculate the ratios for the other samples, we'll see that we've got a creatinine on day 8 of 5, which gives us a ratio of 7. And then on day 18, we've got a creatinine of 8.5 with a ratio of 10.6. So you can see day 8 is a little bit different to the other 2 samples. So is this going to be a problem? We don't have all the information. So when we add in the collection time for the samples, you can see that the day 8 sample was actually collected close to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whereas day 1 and day 18 were collected around 10 or 11. If a donor is taking a medicinal cannabis product, it's important, if you're monitoring their levels over time, that you are as consistent as possible in your collection. So this wouldn't matter if you were just testing for abstinence. If a donor, you're just testing to see if somebody has abused cannabis in the past and have they stopped using, you don't necessarily need to worry about what time you're taking the result, because we're just looking for a decrease in that ratio over time. But when you're monitoring for consistent use, the peak to trough concentrations should be similar from day to day when the medication's being used consistently. So the key takeaway here is when you're doing repeat testing for a donor who is using a medicine, it's important to be consistent in your collection. A difference in collection conditions can affect the look of a result if you're not fully considered when you're interpreting those results. It's best to collect that collection time as consistent as possible. And if you need to vary anything, like if you want some randomness to the data, you should just try varying the collection day instead. However, in this case, it does appear that the donor was using their medication consistently. So how confident are people that their policy would be enforceable? We've got 60% think it would be and 40% think it might not be. So that's an interesting sort of result to see how confident people are. I'm not quite sure what we'd expect, but I guess it's almost 50-50 about whether or not people think that they would be enforceable. It might be worth having a look at your policy and just reviewing.
And it might tie in, Nathan, to the final poll question as well.
I think it will, Matt. Yes. So for case study 2, we have a case that's currently in front of the federal court. Mitchell Rice's employment with Queensland Rail was terminated based on an oral fluid swab returning a positive lab-confirmed result for THC during a random drug test. So Mitchell had been prescribed his medicinal cannabis to treat anxiety related to his shift work and his mother's terminal cancer diagnosis. His prescribing doctor advised him not to take the medication within 8 hours of starting work to ensure that he wasn't impaired. As you'll note, the oral fluid detection window is typically 8 to 12 hours. So his doctor was doing the right thing to say, make sure you take it well before you start work. We don't want to have it causing any problems on your work. His supervisor had been advised of his medicinal cannabis prescription, but he had previously been placed on light duties and was declared unfit for work by Queensland Rail's CMO in January of 2021. Following the death of his mother in February, Rice returned to work and offered to refrain from taking his medication. On the 1st of June, though, he underwent a random drug test and the results were positive for THC. He then declared that he had started taking his medication again and had a dose 2 nights prior. He was suspended that day and terminated 2 months later. So this case will likely be determined based on the drug and alcohol policy at his employer and how it's been applied in the past. The case is a little more involved than a standard termination due to the medicinal cannabis use. However, Mitchell's statement that he wouldn't use his prescribed medication could play a fair big part in this one. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays through. There is another case also that's come before the courts, which is being referred to the Human Rights Commission in relation to medicinal cannabis use in Australia as well. So that will be another one to follow, but we don't have the details for that one now. So as a last question, we're just going to ask, when was the last time you updated your drug and alcohol policy? So we've got 3 options there: within the last 12 months, within the last 1 to 3 years, and more than 3 years ago. Okay, so as you can see, policy is and will continue to be critical to how medicinal cannabis is treated in the workplace. And policy does need to be tailored to each individual employer. This space is changing quite quickly. States are now getting on board with medicinal cannabis and how it's being prescribed. And as you can see, those numbers are only going to increase. It'll be very interesting to see what the numbers are like next year or the year after when we do another review of all that information from the prescription data. And it looks like 60% of people have updated their policy in the last 12 months, which is really good to see. And then 30% within the last 1 to 3 years, with about 12% less, more than 3 years ago. So that's really good to see that lots of people are keeping an eye on top of their drug and alcohol policy. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll throw it back to questions to see if we've got any questions for people.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. I'm just rifling through some of the questions here. I'll read this out, and this is probably a good one for you to answer, Nathan. With regards to pre-employment testing, if someone has declared they are taking medicinal cannabis, are we able to are we able to determine the CBD to THC ratio?
So we don't currently offer CBD testing in the laboratory. It's because we work to the standards, and CBD was not really part of the standard in 2019 when the oral fluid standard was updated, and it hasn't been part of the urine standard at all, which was last updated in 2008. It's currently being reviewed again at the moment. We are able to test for CBD. It's not impossible, but the ratio that you get in the lab is not necessarily going to give you an accurate representation of what the medicine they were taking is. You'd be better off looking to see based on what they've been prescribed, and then making a decision based on that result. I guess whether or not you'd be able to employ them. It's not. The CBD to THC ratio we'd get in the sample would only be good for determining the difference between sort of somebody who's saying they're taking a category 1, which is basically pure CBD, versus somebody who might be taking category 2, 3, 4, or 5, where we would expect to have THC present as well.
Not a problem. Just a reminder, everyone, the little question tab up in the right hand corner there. If you've got any questions, then shoot them through. A question here. Any feedback on how the insurers, motor vehicles, are viewing potential changes to road use and potential impairment?
That's a good question.
Yeah, maybe that one with that Victorian.
Yes, I think this will feed back into the fact that we don't have a way to determine an accurate level, I guess, of THC on site after an accident or that. You can do a swab, which will tell you if there's nothing present or something present, but at the moment those samples need to go back to the lab to get an accurate quantitative level of THC in the sample. I guess it would be similar to alcohol, would probably be the way I would say. If you are deemed to be under the cutoff required to drive for alcohol, you are considered to be insured. If you're over that level, there may be issues. And that'll probably be the same thing with THC. Again, if you return a negative result, you should be fine. If there was any THC in the system, it's really difficult to say whether or not it's going to cause impairment. We don't have an accurate test for impairment roadside, I guess, like we do for alcohol. It's basically coming down to the police officer's opinion on whether or not you are affected by that medication at the moment.
And the outcome of the new study that's going on in Victoria, Nathan, where they're testing driving impairment and medicinal cannabis. I think they're doing you might be able to elaborate more on the testing they're going to be doing on that down in Victoria over the next 12 months.
Yeah, so they're looking to start a program here. The Cannabis Party got a couple of seats here in Parliament, so they are looking to push that through as part of their deal, where they will do some sort of trial for medicinal cannabis with people being allowed to drive. They'll be able to submit their prescription basically, and it will be recorded against their license. And that will be noted then when they're pulled over that they may not need to undergo an oral fluid test, or they may do an oral fluid test and have different requirements around how that's processed. There may be some form of a test to see if they are impaired, like roadside, where they might detect whether or not somebody is slurring their speech, or maybe responding a little bit slowly, or has lower reaction times. But we're not quite sure yet how that's going to proceed. It's still very early days for that. I think they're looking to start the 1st of January next year at the moment.
Not a problem. Next question is around, sounds like maybe someone that we've worked with previously, around their zero tolerance policy, which has previously been provided by us. Should we be updating, replacing the zero harm policy, and can Safework assist? Yes, obviously we can assist. Obviously the landscape is changing, and again that's based on the industry you're in, the legislation that's applied to that industry. But yes, more than happy to review that policy with you for the person who asked that question.
Yeah, and you may have employees where you do need a zero tolerance policy. It's not necessarily. You may have employees that are in a position that is so safety critical that they should have nothing, but that will come back to the industry you're in and what you need to do. Yeah. Yep,
not a problem. Could we just get a letter from their doctor to state if they can continue doing their normal duties, similar to a suitable duties, restricted duties plan?
Yeah, look, I think that's probably the way forward at the moment, is to get a medical clearance from their GP or their prescribing doctor that they can perform their normal duties. Like you said, whatever their role may be, it might be decided that yes, they can, or perhaps they can't make safety critical decisions in the morning or do certain tasks within a certain time frame of use. If it was for me, if I was taking medicinal cannabis, I would probably say I probably shouldn't do anything critical in the morning, making any critical decisions in the morning until you've had that 12 hours at least for it to be pushed through your system, and shouldn't then be affecting you.
Yeah, agree. And again, look, I think it comes down to your policy, and I think encouraging whether they're new employees or current employees to be open with their communication that you're starting this medication, and to be able to work out a plan around when that medication's taken, how it's prescribed, the level, as we went through there, the level of prescription, and how we can work that into the workplace. Another question: are you able to test and differentiate between prescribed dosage and use against misuse, I suppose, or recreational misusing even the prescribed dosage?
Yeah, it is possible if we know the prescription that they're taking and how much they're expecting to use. So if we know that somebody is taking a 50-50 THC CBD mix, and we know how much they're using a night, roughly what time they're using it, and we have some information on their biology, so whether male or female, their height, their weight, their age. It is possible with a lot of interpretation to get an understanding of whether or not that result would be consistent with what we'd expect from medicinal cannabis. I can't give you a number that we would use, one-off generally, but yes, it is something that we could look at. We would probably go to our toxicologist with all that information to have a look and see if the results we're getting are what we would expect from that particular medication. There are a lot of different medicinal cannabis products available, and they change quite regularly. So we would need to know exactly what they're taking. We can find that information out and then get back to you with some sort of letter or something with that response to what we'd expect.
Yeah, not a problem. Next question. So just to confirm, if someone provides a negative result on an oral fluid test, then we can be comfortable that they are not impaired.
Yes, that's what we would assume. Yeah, if a screen's coming back negative, that means we're not detecting THC in the oral fluid above 15 nanograms per mil, and we would assume then that they are not impaired. The impairment window for THC, like I said, we quote that 8 to 12 hours. It's probably a little bit less in terms of actual mental impairment. That's just sort of the window that we'd expect it to return a non-negative result. The science on this one is still up in the air a little bit. The studies can be difficult to get done and difficult to get funded. So there is still a lot of work to be done in this area, and people are constantly doing studies to really narrow down that window of impairment across the population. So yeah, hopefully we can put this space and have some more information.
Here's an interesting one, Nathan. Could it be considered discrimination not to employ people with a medicinal cannabis prescription?
Yes. Again, I think this will come back to how things are played out in court. I don't think it's been tested from a legal point of view, but I would say yes, you may have issues if you knocked somebody back just for the fact that they had a medicinal cannabis prescription. In the same way that if you found somebody that was on painkillers all the time, who declared that they were taking Panadine twice a day, and then you didn't give them a job, you would probably be the same. You do need to be aware that it can be considered discrimination on the basis of a medicinal cannabis as well as any other medication. It does need to be taken in a holistic approach to what they're taking and what the role is, and whether or not it would be they'd be suitable for that role.
Not a problem. With prescribed cannabis and the prescriptions, are they labelled? And you alluded to the categories. Are they labelled with the categories that they fit into, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.?
I'm not sure. I haven't actually seen them. I don't think so, but I couldn't tell you for certain. I haven't seen. We've seen a couple of photos, and I don't remember seeing the category that they're in listed specifically. But they will list on in their name what percentage of THC or CBD is in there. So we should be able to work it out from that.
Which fits into the category. Yep.
Yeah. Which category fits into, yeah.
Okay. Are we saying there shouldn't be a concern with impairment or safety risks if someone has been prescribed CBD through TGA and has a prescription and is taking the prescribed medication? So if we're talking with CBD there,
Yeah.
prescribed CBD, and I think that's what you alluded to earlier, Nathan, that there are no psychoactive ingredients within CBD.
Yes.
So no perceived impairment issues.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, it is having an effect on the brain in terms of helping with their pain or their anxiety or whatever, but it does not have the same psychoactive effect as delta-9 THC. So it doesn't cause the high; they just get the benefits of the other materials. It's kind of sort of like the difference between taking codeine and morphine, I guess. If you take one, we prescribe codeine over the counter for pain, but we don't generally give morphine out over the counter. And I'd be more worried about somebody taking morphine directly than somebody taking a couple of Panadine with codeine in them. It's the same sort of thing. You can take CBD and not have an issue. They also will not return a non-negative. They shouldn't return necessarily a non-negative on the device if they're taking it as prescribed, and they would return a negative result in the lab if they only had CBD.
Yeah, there's an interesting one here. Are people under any obligation to disclose they have a prescription?
I don't know specifically. I think it varies depending on where you're located, and I guess what they're happy to do. They do have a right to privacy, but again, if it's going to impair their ability to do their work, then yes, I think they probably should just declare if they're taking, especially THC. If somebody's using the THC, yeah.
And I think you're right there, Nathan. They do have the right to privacy, so they do not have to disclose it. But you would like to think that they have the opportunity to have an open, non-discriminatory conversation with their employee or employer, to have that conversation to become able to come to some form of resolution, as you would if they were on an opiate-based or an amphetamine-based prescription as well. Because there is obviously with those, there's also that potential for, if abused, if taken at the wrong time, that there is potentially impairment issue.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So again, going into new ground and new territory for both employer and employee, I suppose an open door policy to be able to have that conversation would be a good piece of addition to have within your policy. More questions there. I might get through one more question there. Just as a reminder, we will log all these questions and we'll come back with a more comprehensive response. Let me see here. How does the THC-free CBD prescription versus traces of THC in CBD prescriptions?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. We wouldn't expect, obviously they have to have, they can't say there's no THC present in a CBD category 1 mix because there's no way to be certain that we've removed all traces of THC from a medication or a plant material. So it's done, they're given a little bit of leeway. Like I said, it's up to 2% of all other cannabinoids. So when they do their testing, the medicine at the manufacturer, they would look to see, is it more than 98% CBD? And if it is, then it can be classed as category 1. There will possibly still be trace levels of THC in there, but at less than 2% of the total compound, you wouldn't expect it to have too much of an effect. We would not expect that to trigger a non-negative result in oral fluid if the level is 2% or less of the active ingredient in the medicine. So no, you should still return a negative. It's not cut and dried yet exactly. We haven't seen enough of this in the lab, I guess, to say for certain that we wouldn't ever see one return a non-negative, but we would not expect it. Especially confirmation should be well below the cutoff.
Yep, not a problem. Look, I think that we're on 40 minutes now. Like I said, we'll come back with a comprehensive. We'll record all of the questions on here, try and group them together, and come back with more detailed responses for you. But as we're at the 40 minutes, and just aware there's probably more time required on this, just to thank everyone for attending, and hope you found this piece informative and thought-provoking. Like I said, we will compile the questions and send that out in the next couple of days the next webinar, the plan is to step on from this one, and we'll build around the questions, concerns, and feedback that we receive, and also along with any potential changes that occur within legislation. And look, it might even be a case that we pull in other subject matter experts to complement our information and findings. So again, remember, if you have any other questions after we finish, or if you wish to make some personal contact, then please reach out to us initially at info@swhealth.com.au. And on behalf of Nathan, myself, and Safework Health, please enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody.